So with that, I'm going to ask Angel if you could please come up if you want to introduce the folks, and we'll get started on tonight's program.
Sounds good, thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, come on up. Okay, I have notes because I wanted to be prepared. So my name is Angel Turner, and I'm kind of going to be your moderator tonight. I am a senior data scientist at Growers, which is a precision agriculture company. We're located in RTP now, but we used to be based in Garner just a few days ago. And Growers is basically focused on making precision agriculture work for farmers. They are a rapidly expanding company. I also organize and run the AgBio, AgTech networking group. We're a future-focused agriculture networking group. We meet in RTP, Durham, Raleigh once a month. And I have a strong interest in the innovation process, and I'm extremely interested in creating a more positive future in agriculture with reduced impact on our ecosystems. So I'd like to let Bobby, Vick, and Scott Jones introduce themselves because they know more about themselves than I do. They promised to keep it short, so. Yes.
All right. I probably don't need the microphone, but good evening. My name is Bobby Vick, and I am on the agriculture team at PrecisionHawk here in Raleigh. If you're not familiar with PrecisionHawk, we are a drone and data analytics company. We've been in Raleigh, well, we've been around since about 2010. The company's been in Raleigh, I think, since 2012. Our chairman of our board and our angel investor is a guy by the name of Bob Young. If you don't recognize his name immediately, you'll recognize the company that he founded, which was Red Hat. And so we started out very much in the space of actually manufacturing hardware and making drones. But today we work with leading hardware manufacturers who actually no longer make our own drones. Today our focus is on providing data services, so it would be a software, but also services even with collecting data, training people how to use drones in their day-to-day operation. And my role on the ag team is I sort of serve as the liaison, if you will, between our clients and our development team. I'm an ag engineer by training, but I was telling someone earlier, I'm probably not the best, if you will, on the sales side. I'm definitely not the best on the programming side, but I can speak both languages. So part of my role is to get to know our clients, get to understand what their needs are, and then work with our development team to make sure that the solutions we're bringing to them meet and are towards the goals that they have established. So glad to be here.
Sorry, that has to go over your lap.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Scott Jones. I'm excited to be here. I learned about this group last year, and I'm excited to be amongst you now. I come from a background in product management, innovation, going from 0 to 1 many times in industries like AgTech and marketing technology and Internet of Things. All of my career kind of undergirded by the notions of data science, analytics, big data, etc. Last year, I spent a number of months with BASF as I was hired as a sort of outsider to help them think differently about technology. And in that time, I spent a lot of time talking about my background in innovation and how to innovate differently than they were, and in that time soaked up a lot about the opportunities I think we're going to discuss tonight. So I'm excited to dig in.
Thank you. Okay, so I just want to set the stage really quick, and then we'll start asking some questions, and then shortly I'll take some questions from you guys. So, as you know, with all the countries that are rapidly developing around the world and the increasing population, we're headed toward, you know, the 9 billion by 2050 and all of that. There's just this huge demand for producing more, you know, food with less resources. We have to do it better, we have to do it with the less ecological impacts, we have to do it with a smaller footprint on the land. And in order to do this, we have to innovate in agriculture. So AgTech plays a huge part of this. I'm sure you've all heard about smart farms, the connected farm. How many of you actually work in agriculture right now? Okay. All right, so that's important though. I mean, you know, agriculture needs new people. Agriculture needs people who know tech. Agriculture needs people who know, you know, all of the solutions that we're just starting to get into developing that are going to be coming online more and more in the next few years. So to start that out, basically, let's start with Bobby. I'll go ahead with you first. So you're an agricultural engineer. What got you interested in agriculture, and how do you feel like your interest in agriculture is being satisfied at PrecisionHawk?
That's a great question, and one I'm glad to answer. So if you can't tell from my accent, I'm from North Carolina. I was actually raised in Wilson, and I come from an ag background. My family my dad was a farmer. He actually quit farming when I was in middle school, but I have a family that's comes from an ag background. And growing up, I don't really think I had a strong appreciation for that background, but the older I get, the more I do appreciate it. And so when I got to state, I knew I wanted to do something in engineering. I didn't know that there was a such thing as ag engineering. So I came in as probably, if there are any engineers in the room, many of you probably started up maybe as engineering undeclared. And you learn about all the different fields. And I ended up getting connected to ag engineering, fell in love with it. It really touches on a lot of the different elements of other engineering fields, but with a particular bent on agriculture. And what led me to PrecisionHawk, and really what truly is what makes me excited about the opportunity, is while I was at State, I had the opportunity to work with a lot of people from industry, so people from the Bayers, the BASFs of the world, to academia, all the way down to the farmer level. And I saw all this really innovative technology being developed at the industry level and even at the university level, and a hunger among growers to use that, but a huge disconnect. I'm sure you can speak to this in terms of the potential of the technology, where it could go versus what farmers are actually doing with the technology. So, you know, sort of what drives me on a day-to-day basis is to help find applied solutions, actually connect that technology together. And I think in the ag world particularly, you know, farmers get a bad rap for not being innovative people. They're not, you know, wanting to. You see the guy in the overalls with the straw hanging out of his mouth. But yet farmers are some of the most innovative people that I know. But I don't know if skeptical is the word, but they want you to prove yourself. And so,
well, they run a business.
They do, and they're very business savvy. So I say there's sort of three things we have to be mindful of in the AgTech space. Is it has to be reliable. You know, if it works 9 times, that's great. That 10th time might kill you if it doesn't work. It has to be user friendly, especially from a tech side. If you start telling a farmer, it's easy. All you do is this step, this step, this step, this step. By the time you get past, you know, step 2 or 3, they're like, I think I'm going to stick to the way I do it today. And then, most importantly, that I'm guilty of, and I think a lot in the industry are lose sight of, is you have to bring value. If the technology that you're bringing to them only is going to allow them to produce crops in the same manner they always have, at equal efficiency or maybe a marginal gain, there's not going to be a lot of encouragement for adoption. So I think there has to be a key focus on what that long-term return on investment is going to be. And I think that is what has made, in some cases, adoption rates be lower than we would like them to be in AgTech. But I think we're starting to see a progression there, because people are starting to see the value, both on the farmer side, but also on the development side, in terms of keeping that in their focus.
Very good. Yeah. Okay, so Scott, how about you? Have you seen that farmers are drowning in their data, or do you see solutions coming out that are starting to solve some of these problems with getting tech on the farm and utilized?
I'm inclined to agree with Bobby's point. The thing that struck me is the economic decision-making of farmers, where they'll say, on this hand, you're asking me to make this investment, and on this hand, I know I'm going to need a new truck. I know the return I'm going to get from having a new truck and what it's going to do for me, and the implications of spending that for my budget and the tax write-off I can do. But if I compare that to, and I'm making this up, I don't know, you wouldn't necessarily sell them a drone, but maybe services. They're like, well, this kind of esoteric thing that might give me some marginal return, blah, blah, blah. Truck, I'm going to buy a truck. that happens a lot. What I found, just if I were to answer your question in a different way, what I found is there is, let's say over here somewhere, lots of effort, R&D work, a lot of investments on progressive technology, really cool ideas, very similar to other industries, the idea of identifying new signals, identifying new ways of optimizing against those signals, identifying ways of either automating what you do with that or surfacing insights such that a human can do something. Like, that's all relevant here, but the disconnect is it's not connected with the farms yet. And that's obviously not trivial to do, so it's a huge problem to solve.
Okay, speaking of that, so apparently broadband connectivity is a huge issue. Even just here in North Carolina, for farmers, they have trouble deploying technology on their farms in eastern North Carolina, a lot of times because of broadband issues. Some companies are trying to use cell signals for what they are doing, but you can't always do that. So what types of solutions have each of you seen in this area?
All right, either way.
Right, I got this. It was fascinating. I had like what you just said, cell pops into my mind. I'm working on multiple concepts for mobile apps or even a web application that should be accessible by a user. And I take for granted, I live in a city or an urban area, I take for granted having access to cell service, but that is not the case. So everything you build needs to accommodate for an offline mode where you're caching things and you're able to allow a user to engage, either be able to pull data up or feed data in, and you need to persist it. That's the big dynamic that struck me. The other thing that was really fascinating to me was I heard this anecdote about Monsanto. It sounds like it was a number of years ago, maybe not that far, let's say a few years ago, where they were working on solving problems that I was working on as well about inventory management, distribution, et cetera, working with channel partners. They actually came up with a barcode tracking system, like either proprietary or they licensed it, I'm not sure, but their strategy was to these places said the same thing, like we don't have the broadband, I can't give you real time, so their strategy was to outfit their channel partners with like military grade Wi-Fi, so that they had like this state-of-the-art connectivity, and they spent that capital expenditure to outfit, it was not a small amount from what I heard, a large group of suppliers, and then they abandoned the project, and now they all have military-grade Wi-Fi still. So that's kind of the nature of what I've learned about like placing big bets and being like, oh, it didn't work out, let's try something else.
I mean, just to piggyback on that, it absolutely is something that we encounter in the day-to-day, challenges, because a lot of the areas that we're working in are rural and don't have good broadband connectivity. It's finally getting the attention from not just ag now. There's actually a lot of talk, even at the federal level, for how do we expand broadband coverage to rural America, because so many of the advancements that we're working with and others, it's really to be able to leverage the power of it, you need access to the cloud. One of the solutions that we've used is we are both developing and working with partners on local solutions that farmers can use right on their own machines in the field without having to connect to the cloud. But then generally we are moving towards being able to have some sort of mechanism so that once they're back where they have connectivity, assuming there is a central point, that the data can then sync back to the cloud. So it is available in other locations, but it's not an ultimate requirement that you have to have that network access to be able to get even basic functionality out of the system. I'm not sure this is a perfect solution, but there's a company, their name is escaping me, but it is down in eastern North Carolina where they have actually set up like a data center where it's literally a place where people in the ag sector can come just to get access to broadband internet. I mean, I'm not sure how efficient it is to think that I'd get in my truck to drive to get to access to, internet, but it's at least, I guess, a step in the right direction, is to bring attention to the problem. And I am also aware of certain localities where farms that at least have enough, revenue and are big enough corporations have actually merited dedicated lines being run to their operations so that they could have that access to internet. Because in this case, think of eastern North Carolina, there's a lot of sweet potato production. So now they have these automated packing houses that are literally tracking all the product that's going through, and all that can store it on the cloud and can be used for, whatever for tracking their data, but they need that connectivity. So I don't think there's a perfect solution to the problem, but it's one that is getting more and more attention with it, which I think is good.
Does anyone have a question at this point?
Oh.
Okay, we'll start in the back and go around this way. So,
PrecisionHawk, regarding your drone technology, when you make a pass over a field, okay, and you've acquired all your data, can you tell the farmer where it appears that, like, for example, the plants are under stress, need more water for irrigation?
Yes, so I was telling someone when I first walked in, I regret in a way that I didn't have a slide or something to show you sort of how the interface works. So I'll give you the quick overview. The way we generally operate, whether it's us flying or a customer is flying a drone themselves, there's automated applications that actually fly the drone. So you think of something like Google Maps. You would draw out the area you want to fly. It calculates how high the drone should fly, how many passes it needs to take. And usually we're not working with video. We're working with just individual still images. What our software does is it takes that imagery and it stitches it all together in a process called orthorectification. So it's making a very high resolution 2D map that is spatial, because there's a GPS coordinates associated with each one of those images that was collected. And then we can apply various analytics on top of it. So at the simplest form would be what we would call a vegetative analytic, where we're looking at its simplest, the greenness, if you will, of the crop, or how dense is the vegetation in an area to make an assessment of how healthy it is or how good the stand is. There are instances where we can derive things that would make, where we can infer things about whether it's nitrogen stress or lack of water. The challenge is, we're not here to replace ground truthing. We're only as good as the level of information we have from the ground. But what we can do is we can help inform the information between the points. A single individual can only walk so much of a field and take point samples from it. We can literally cover a 100-acre field in about 30 minutes to an hour and have sub-inch resolution in terms of the components that we've gathered. So we still have to have that information from the person that really knows what's going on in the field, and we can help them better apply it on a spatial level. And then where we're starting to do more and more work with that imagery is, buzzwords, AI, machine learning. As we have this ground truth, asset management is a ton of what we do. I don't care if it's a farmer or it's a construction site. We want to be able to go through and detect where the plants are, so we know exactly how many plants are in that field, and then you can tie things like how healthy are those plants. I always make the analogy, even for this event, really if you're planning for this event, you don't care how many people you invite, you care how many people show up. Same thing's true in the field. It doesn't matter how many plants I put in the ground, it's how many plants are actually there or viable that are going to impact the yield potential that I have, but also the management that I do of that crop during the season, which I'm sure you can appreciate.
Okay, next question. We're going to go around this way. I'll get to you in a minute. Go ahead, sir.
Two questions. This first one's for Bobby. Drone technology seems to be rather exotic for single-family farms. Is that technology and others like it priced in at a price point where smaller farms can afford it, or is it really something that's only available to the corporate farms?
That's a great question, and I think some of that's yet to be determined, because farmers, I meet a good amount of people in the industry that say, I really don't have any interest in flying data myself, but if there's a service provider that does it, maybe I would. So people like the John Deeres of the world that have traditionally sold hardware or equipment are getting into more and more of the service model. So they offer agronomic services, and maybe one of the value adds they'll say is, I'll have a drone, or maybe we don't have a lot of co-ops around here, but certain areas of the states where you have cooperatives, maybe you have farmers that are sharing technology, so they're not making a singular investment in it. we have products that absolutely are available for at the farmer level, and we do have plenty of people from around the world that buy that actually are farmers. But admittedly, a lot of our day-to-day business today is with what we would call enterprise companies. So the BASFs, the Monsantos of the world, where they can see the immediate value is when they're doing their variety trials, or they're testing different chemistries for a new product they're getting ready to release. They may have a 40-acre field with 100 different research plots in it. There's physical limitations of how much they can cover and how frequently they can cover it to make an objective and quantitative decision. The drone is an immediate mechanism for them to be able to cover that area and at minimum document what's going on over time, and at its best be able to actually more accurately quantify is precisely what's going on in those treatments, because it's all about time to market for those companies. If they can make a decision about a variety that they want to focus on versus one that they know they're going to discard earlier in the process, that saves them a whole lot of extra cost in being able to get that product.
And that's why I asked about the single-family farms, because it sounds like your technology really, I mean, a big company can absorb a portion of the field that's under stress, like the other gentleman said in his question.
Yeah.
They can absorb a field that's under stress and not have to do anything about it because they've got so much capital. Where it sounds like your technology might be able to actually save a farm from financial destruction if you can make that data available.
It is,
to them if
and
they
with
have
all
to fix their
technology,
crops.
the price points are coming down. I mean, 5 to 10 years ago when when it was really starting, the drone itself was $20,000, $30,000. There's no way an individual single-family farm is going to invest in that. Today, I could take a $1,500 drone that you can buy at Best Buy, and I could provide a whole lot of powerful information with it, with some pretty basic software working for it. So is it, there's still an investment cost for not only financially, but also from just a learning standpoint that a farmer has to overcome. But the value and the cost to get in the game, if you will, has dramatically come down already, and I think it's going to continue to improve.
Second question. This sounds a lot like you were talking about the Wi-Fi being available. This sounds a lot like what I've read in history books about the rural electrification project of America, only now it's data. Is there any kind of partnership between private and government to try to advance connectivity to rural areas?
Okay, I'm not aware of specific partnerships. I bet there are some people in this room that might be there. I know that a lot of different companies are trying to launch satellite networks up. Yeah, the funny thing is that I didn't realize what a huge problem that was until I went to the UNC Clean Tech Summit. And of all places to find out, I was in a smart water talk, and one of the people on the panel was the town manager, I guess, for Benson. And apparently they're like a really great, smart, connected town. And I asked about farmers. I'm like, okay, you guys have a lot of farmers around you. Can they be on your smart water? And he's like, no, they have no broadband. And I'm like, oh, okay. So then I started realizing, okay, this is actually a real problem. So in a lot of places. More questions? Yes,
I'd
sir.
like to talk to that subject. I had worked for the state at one point, and there's a major broadband rollout across North Carolina. And it was basically engineered for education. But I don't know, is agriculture at the table to start talking to the state of how can they expand this broadband rollout? I mean, it's just not wireless, but it's a whole bunch of other, even hardwired pieces too that goes to the field. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of opportunities. I can't imagine that Troxler is not on one of these committees to figure out can I leverage, the broadband rollout across North Carolina. That's been going on for about 5 years, I believe. But I mean, they probably just scratch the surface in some of them, especially over in eastern North Carolina. I mean, something you guys want to check into.
Sure. Yeah. Good. Further questions right now? Okay. Yes, sir.
For Bobby, do you have green light fiber out to the family farm yet?
Green light? Was that a Wilson specific
Yeah.
reference? Yeah. So I don't know how specific that question is, but you will recognize there is may or may not be a Vick Family Farms that was in the news because of that. And that
It might have been.
yeah. So as far as I know, yes, they do. But that was there's a whole lot of layers to that conversation.
Were you able to hold on to it after the latest court
So it's my family, it's distant family. Well, they're immediate family, but I'm not directly involved enough to know for sure I know I'm confident they have broadband internet, and I don't. It was one of those cases to not go too much into detail. Greenlight is a broadband internet system that the city of Wilson invested in many years ago. It was a fiber optic network that anyone in the city could access. And they ran some dedicated lines out to areas of the county that were outside the city limits. And in one case, which is this case, they actually crossed the county line because of specific users they were trying to attract. Well, as you can imagine, there were certain broadband providers that did not like that. But the challenge to it was those broadband providers weren't offering service in the area, so there was no alternative. So it was in the courts, and who had the ability to do it, and I honestly don't know exactly how it all came out in the wash. But it just goes to point to the importance of the conversation that we're having. And I think it was or maybe the question about are there partnerships with industry and government. I can't speak to the specifics, but I'm pretty sure I read an article recently about the latest farm bill, which farm bill always includes tons of things that are not just farm specific. Mm-hmm. But I think this idea of broadband connectivity was absolutely one of them. I was on a panel about a year and a half ago that was in DC specifically to this topic, and there were representatives not only from the telecom companies themselves, but then obviously, it's a big deal here, but we think it's bad here. You go to some of the parts of the Midwestern U.S. where you can't even find a Walmart in 50 miles, much less a broadband signal. So
that's not a bad thing.
Oh well, that's true. that fair point. But there's trade-offs, I guess, to everything. So, anyways.
Actually, want to make a comment about the question about drones' ability to diagnose health and stuff. One thing that struck me was interfacing with R&D team members who were working on exploring essentially the entire electromagnetic spectrum from the largest waves to the smallest. And you can imagine if you can go up to a human and put your hand on their forehead, your wrist on their forehead, and say, you have a fever. They were exploring the same sorts of ways of diagnosing that a plant has a fever or is sick, with the signals that could come off from temperature or spectral analysis, thermal analysis, all sorts of other wavelengths, and exploring that through drones. So putting the appropriate sensor on it, flying it, seeing what data you get, etc. Ultimately trying to get to a point where you can imagine, I'm sure you guys are talking about this all the time, a single drone that can cover as much of that as relevant. Yeah.
Okay, actually, I'm going to pass it right back to you. Yeah, I was curious, in your role, when you were working with BASF, what were some of the innovative uses for sensors that you were seeing, in terms of row crops, but if they were doing anything beyond that too?
I think, well, I might abstract sensors to mean a bunch of things. One that was really interesting to me was computer vision. I don't know if will we count that, maybe? Sure. The notion of having mobile apps where you can snap a photo of a plant and on the device. I mean, one version I saw would call a partner's server, which is not that exciting, but the notion that on the device it can be updated with a machine learning model such that it could diagnose what's wrong with the plant and what to do about it. I thought that was pretty fascinating, with a very snappy response time. Another one that really blew my mind was having smart sprayers. Again, using computer vision such that in real time you could have a single, I think you'd call it a single boom, or it would have a sensor and it could have multiple, I'm not going to use the right terminology, let's say different ways of spraying different products. It would be able to say, oh, that's a bad insect, that's a good plant, give it the right thing, that's a plant I don't want, shoot that with something to kill it, that's another bug, etc. And being able to do that as it's going in real time. Those sorts of optimizations, and that technology melted my brain, to be honest. That's amazing. That's kind of where, if we're like looking at where all these axes of innovation are converging, that's kind of the end goal of. I know what I've heard now is sensors are at a state where a farmer they'll be on their iPad either monitoring or reading the news while their tractor runs its course. And ultimately, they're not going to have to be there. It's going to be all sensors. It's going to be an optimization engine saying, I see this, therefore do that.
Okay, more questions? You first, and we'll go over there.
All right, so real quick, so assuming that issues with bandwidth and whatever are all taken care of, what are the challenges in the future for simply just the sheer amount of data and managing it? And how often do you clean out the old stuff, and why would you want to keep it? And what are you looking at now in terms of, I mean, I've got to be thinking, terabytes upon terabytes of stuff.
Sure. Technically, I'm moderating, so you can answer.
I think they'll allow you to answer as well, because I'm sure you can speak to this, but if you want to see a farmer's eyes roll, mention the term big data. And I have a slide that I show a lot of times that I don't care what flavor tractor is what I say, any of them now have multiple computer screens in it. And the number one things that farmers are harvesting today is actually data. A farmer in the palm of their hand and a phone or a tablet has more information than a farmer 20 years ago would have had in their entire career. The challenge with that is now, what do I do with it? Machines have been equipped with yield monitors, so they just essentially could create a map of where the yield came from in the field for years. And I've heard stories of farmers that would print these out, have these really nice PDF reports, put them in a notebook, they put them in a stack in the corner of their office. They had 10 years of yield data, and so, well, what do you do with it? Well, put it in the notebook and put it in the corner, but well, what are you really doing with it? So I think the challenge, the whole industry, there is the logistical challenge of literally the data storage, the resource of, quickly, we have SD cards in all the drones that we're flying, making sure with imagery it's not that big of a thing, but hyperspectral, we can collect terabytes of data in a really short amount of time. What do you do with that? But I think more challenging thing today is not data storage, it's data synthesization. Yeah. How do I synthesize what I have and actually do something with it? And that's the key point. There's always the capturing the data, make sure it's good data, but then getting to being able to actually do something with it and determine how much do I actually need to hold on to versus what can I afford to get rid of. So, that's absolutely a challenge that we face on a day-to-day basis. And even we want to always collect data with as much resolution, for example, as we can. But then a lot of times we may downsample that in terms of actually making the decisions because we don't need literally every bit that we could collect. I'll let you answer now.
Okay, sure. Everything he said for my current role and my current job. But in a research capacity, I've definitely seen those types of decisions be made where you're looking at all this data coming in, you're pulling data from hyperspectral imaging data, and you have to make decisions about how long to keep it. But in a research setting, you can develop a gated process where you know what your product is that you're producing at the end that delivers the value, that delivers the insight. And then after you're comfortable getting through all of your QC steps and everything else to produce that product, then you can let the previous data go. I mean, because
Can you really, as a data scientist, ever let go?
Yeah, we had to. Sometimes you have to. But yeah, so if that kind of answers that.
So far, my understanding of the AgTech sector data that you guys are compiling and leveraging, ultimately it's about efficiency and yield and all that. But in the quiet of the night, when you have a moment to dream big, to dream very large, what comes to mind? Holy crap, what if we did this? Do you have those moments where
I have those moments like all the time.
Absolutely, yeah.
just beyond just efficiency, just something that's just like, whoa, we took all this technology and did this instead. Holy crap!
Yeah, definitely. I think the future is going to be interesting. I don't know if I'll get to see everything, but I mean, I'm sure there's always new things coming down the line. But yeah, one thing that I really love, I mean, it's AgBio and AgTech, both of them, right? When you think about the innovations that are happening in the life sciences combined with the innovations that are happening on the tech side, it's really cool because then you can start seeing just complete transformations. And I'm really excited about lab meat. I know that's a whole different topic, but I'm super excited about that. I think that we have a real potential to decouple food production from the land. I think we have the potential to look at growing our food really, you know, in controlled environments and growing basic proteins and amino acids in bioreactors and utilizing hacking photosynthesis to basically photosynthesize the sugars that feed the bioreactors. And I mean, I think of all kinds of crazy stuff, so I should not have had the microphone when you asked that question. I'm going to pass it on to Scott.
I love it though, because it's pointing us in a direction.
You go.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad. So I'm glad you said that, Bridges. That was a different angle than I would have thought, but I was sort of, it absolutely applies. I think maybe because of the nature of the space that I work in, when I think of that, you know, ideal world, I don't know how far away it is, but I do think automation is going to, and robotics are going to continue to be an increasing part of agriculture. You know, John Deere made a big splash this year at CES. They had a huge combine in one of the events because there was all this focus on autonomous vehicles, and John Deere was like, we've had autonomous tractors for 20 years. But having said that, there's still a whole lot of human interaction. And I think there's always going to be human interaction. I don't think you can entirely replace that. But I'll speak specifically to one of the things we face in drones. And you know, what would help make a small farmer or other farmers be able to use it would be improvement of technology, but also lessening of some of the regulatory restrictions around it. So I think specifically, I worked in irrigation before I went to PrecisionHawk. There's a lot of center pivot irrigation systems across the Midwest or the U.S. in general. If you've ever seen those large circles when you're flying over, all of those is a power source. And I could envision a day where a drone or a robot of any kind is literally docking there to charge. It goes out at night and it flies, it collects its data, it all comes back to a central, a lot of those are already equipped with telemetry anyway, so that it's a way for you to get the data back. But in the current environment we operate in, to fly a drone without having a very specific waiver, you have to maintain visual line of sight. And it has to be an operator, a one-to-one operator, unless you're Intel and you're doing a show at the Super Bowl. But in that case, they've got a specific waiver to be able to do even that. So I think if you could get to the day where, and I'm not talking about drones flying, I understand the safety piece and the privacy piece, but I don't think drones necessarily are always going to be operating hundreds of feet. I think you could literally have drones that are flying 10, 20 feet off the ground that are just going over at a plant level, inspecting, literally plant by plant what they see. But it's interesting to me that to fly a less than 5-pound drone commercially, I have to go through a federal regulation process. It's a multiple choice test, but you have to get certified to do it. But I was at this AgTech event a few years ago where it was literally people in their garage had built autonomous tractors. I mean, talk 2-ton tractors that were driving themselves across the field. And there's no I was sitting there thinking to myself, here's a 2-ton tractor driving across a field with no one touching the controls of it. But if I want to get out this 5-pound drone, I have to have a card, that says I've taken a test. And I understand it. I get where it comes from, but it seems a little contradictory. But so I think as the technology improves, automation improves, and then the regulatory environment lessens. And again, we're not asking to fly drones over downtown Raleigh. I'm talking about rural environments where it would be a safe operating. I think then we'll be able to see even more adoption of the types of technology that you're speaking to. That take long enough? That's good.
They knocked it out of the park. I would just pepper some thoughts that strike me. The notion of farming without using the land is something that resonate with me just from articles I've read about, like, I believe you call it vertical farming, where you're essentially in a high rise in an urban place. Almost like doing a biodome project. That's really fascinating. This isn't exactly about innovation, but just kind of looking in the crystal ball of how companies like the large players in both AgTech or just agriculture, selling chemicals, selling seeds, etc. The thing that really struck me was learning about the intense commoditization of all their products, such that it's very arbitrary. If I'm going to decide to buy seeds from BASF versus seeds from Dow versus seeds from somebody else, you can't, like right now the sales are largely predicated on relationships and asking you about your children and how their football's going, such that you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to buy those things from you. But being able to actually make a tangible case that this product's going to perform better than that one is going away. So you could imagine in the future a lot of consolidation, a lot of players disappearing, the market vastly changing. And that's why the big impetus on AgTech is so big right now, because they have to provide value ancillary to just selling you products. So it's kind of this open field now, and that's why companies are dumping so much money into it, because it's an existential crisis. You have to provide more of an experience, like the insights, and not just vomiting data out at you, but saying, this is important, this is what you need to do next. And along with that, by the way, I can sell you a product that can help you do that, but I also want to create a relationship and provide value beyond just selling you my stuff.
Okay, more questions? Yes?
Yeah, I've got one more. With a few comments a few minutes ago, it sounds like there's a lot of really cool, optimistic things for the future. But what are some of the downsides? You know, clearly food bats, next thing you know, you're slugging a grain or whatever, but what are some potential risks or problems with tech and ag for the next, say, 10, 15 years?
Yeah. Okay, Scott's.
Yeah, a thing that I've been saying blow my mind a lot. I would just take a step to the side and say I had no idea I was going to work in agriculture, and it really opened my eyes to so much. But one of them was around genetically modified crops, and the idea that you can make a crop resistant to a particular treatment, whether it's the idea that the plants in my field are tuned such that if I spray this, only the things that aren't that plant will die, and the idea that if I spray that on a windy day, I might accidentally kill my neighbor's plants because they're not resistant. That's a thing. That kind of path freaks me out, and just the threads of creating these crops where there's patents tied to them, and if you don't buy the license and it ends up drifting onto your property, you're like liable and subject to litigation, etc. Like those sorts of dynamics make me uncomfortable.
Sure, we haven't really talked about animal agriculture much, but there's a lot of ag tech around animal agriculture, and you know, smart paddocks, I suppose, sensors that you know, help monitor the health of cattle and sheep and all of that, hogs. But there's a continued risk from antibiotics use in those settings. Fortunately, though, AgTech actually has a real positive role to play there by helping to reduce that risk some with more precise evaluations of animal health, whether an animal needs an antibiotic or doesn't need an antibiotic.
I don't know if I have a great answer to add on to the two that have been made, but I mean, I guess I'll piggyback on some of Scott's answer in that Ags has succumbed to, I think, the challenge that any industry can with technology is the if some is good, more is better mentality. Really what's gotten us in trouble around, I don't think that genetically modified organisms, for example, of and in themselves is the bad thing, or the name that, you know, everyone detests is Roundup. Well, if you look at conventional farming practices years ago, it was very detrimental to the soil, and there was a lot of soil that was lost because of ways of having to control weeds, and the amount of production that you could get out of a singular field without some of the modifications that have been made was limited. But what has gotten us in trouble is, you know, this mentality of, well, if I can spray a little bit of Roundup, then surely a lot of Roundup is better. And anytime you take, I don't care what technology it is, I feel like there's always going to be a trade-off. There's always going to be a way that someone can use it positively, but put in the wrong hands or uninformed hands, it can lead to, you know, negative impacts. And I think that's the challenge that we face. In our realm, we're collecting and storing a lot of data, which is great, but then we run into issues of data privacy and who owns that information, who has access to that data, how are we keeping that data secure. The number one manufacturer of drones that we work with is a Chinese-based company, so everyone is, you know, obviously is paranoid of, well, what are they able to see? What are they doing with this information? I mean, to the point where the U.S. government won't buy a drone manufactured or certain government entities won't buy a drone manufactured by this company. So I think, you know, some of that is misinformation. It's educating the people that you're working with, but also the public. But I think also farmers and people across the ag tech spectrum have a certain level of responsibility to use the technology that they're using wisely and not just with a short-term mindset, but the long-term impacts of that technology as well.
Okay, so we actually covered another question I have, kind of. It was, you asked a question about what the risks were, but I have one about what are the biggest consumer-related issues. So could either one of you speak to, I mean, I guess you're talking about farmers being the main consumer. What about urban agriculture? You mentioned growing in vertical spaces, that type of thing. What do you think the risks are with urban agriculture, agritexture? Agritexture is basically architecture with growing spaces built into it. So
Write that one down.
yeah, there's actually a really famous blog, I guess, entitled AgTech. It's turned into a consulting business. They run AgTech Atlanta or something like that now. It's a big conference in Atlanta about urban agriculture. So if you have an interest in that, yeah, what do you think the risks are? Or
I can speak to it if you want while you're.
Yeah.
consumers?
So, I mean, to me, and maybe I'm the pessimist in the room, but a lot of with any technology or the type of, like urban agriculture they're talking about, and even locally grown, which I'm a huge proponent of, but generally there's additional cost associated with it. And
Sure.
Right or wrong, we as consumers have come to expect to be able to go to the grocery store at any given time of the year and find a ripe tomato for a reasonable price. You can't, at least today, some of the practices that we're talking about, you can't. I don't see a way to do that and match the pricing that we're used to. Now I think there will be ways of getting there, but I guess what I'm saying is that if it becomes cliche, but if we're truly going to 9 billion people in 2050, we have to be mindful of are the technologies and the practices that we're talking about truly not going to serve just a certain sector of people that is living in urban America? Will it also be able to meet the needs of the rural towns across America where the populations are dwindling and there's not jobs, or other parts of the world? And so I think those are challenges that we can't lose sight of. It'd be almost selfish, I think, to focus on just how we can benefit an urban center, for example, and not have thoughts about the other areas as well.
Yeah, it's just generated lots of thoughts in my head. I don't know if I'm going to tie it directly to what a disadvantage might be. I mean, you got me thinking. We have this notion. We used to be an agricultural economy. Then, after the Industrial Revolution, and then various waves of technology, people left the farm, went to different places, and now we're expecting automation to take a lot of those jobs away, and you're going to have like people becoming artisans and just artists and hanging out, being paid a living wage. You can imagine more people getting back into agriculture. And this is a thing, apparently, like in Brooklyn, for example, lots of hipsters are growing gardens on the rooftops of their apartments. So there is an appetite to do this.
But the interesting thing, though, is
You need the microphone to speak. I'm sorry.
Oh, do I? Am I quiet? I'm sorry if I'm quiet. I was just going to say, the interesting thing about what you're saying is that the people that are growing the rooftop gardens aren't necessarily the places where people are suffering from food deserts in cities.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe there's a role there for,
The hipster
vertical
workforce.
farming, fully automated vertical farms to grow where there's urban deserts.
Right.
Yeah? Okay. All right, further questions?
What about the safety of our food, such as when we have the issue with lettuce, with E. coli? How does the work that you all do, once it's come from the farm, how are we working with like the USDA to then ensure the safety of the crops wherever they come from in this country or elsewhere?
This kind of gets into the other question about sensors. And I'm learning about various companies where they monitor like off-gassing during transportation and other signals that indicate a product is doing well or not. Things like that, such that it doesn't just show up and then you find out there's a problem and people get sick, but rather there could be active monitoring going on, saying, oh, this supply chain, this route, that particular truckload went bad, we should intervene. Stuff like that, as an example.
I think traceability has become such a key component of agriculture in the last decade, or even beyond that. In part because the consumers caring more about where their food came from, but also, to your example, without traceability, if there is one bad batch, if you will, of lettuce, it affects the entire industry. But if we can pinpoint back where the break in the chain was, it's almost become a requirement to preserve the industry, because otherwise you literally are risking everyone pulls lettuce from their shelves, and there's this huge consumer fear. Traceability is an area, admittedly, we've dabbled in. We haven't really found exactly what our role in it is, but I think part of it is, if nothing else, with the technology we're working with, it's another mechanism for documenting what goes on in the field during production. And so if you do, chances are that if there's an outbreak in lettuce or whatever, that they can trace it back to at minimum the farm or the producer it came from, probably in a lot of cases the actual farm where it came from. But I don't know that they have a lot of information once they get back to the farm level to be able to pinpoint what the source of that outbreak was. Was it because there was livestock that were encroaching on it that contaminated the food, or was there some application of product or whatever that was undocumented? I don't know exactly what our role is in that, but I think if you have this documented map of really how fields have performed over time, it gives you just more information of not getting back to just that point where the crop came from, but even being able to help decipher maybe where the outbreak originated. And anytime you can get back to that source, it's for the benefit of the overall industry and the market as a whole.
I'm going to say the obvious because I have to. Traceability is also one of the big potential applications for blockchain in agriculture. So, yeah. Okay.
So based on the survey earlier about how many people are actually working in ag space now, if I read all articles that come out from WRIS TechWire all the time. There was just an article about the real estate market. They opened up Alexandria. So the huge center, they're bringing places in. So what type of companies and what type of fields, if you're not working in ag now and it's growing, it's popular, how could someone, are there certain target companies that are moving to the area or already here hiring, or certain skill sets that maybe are very adaptable to say, hey, I'm doing this over here, and it could be applied here, help the room migrate and fill some of those jobs?
Sure. So, the center that you located, Alexandria Real Estate Equities, is a venture capital and real estate investment firm that owns a lot of lab space in RTP. They also have recently taken over the AgTech Accelerator, which is a local venture group that does investments in agriculture. And they have a center that they've developed where companies can come in and they can start up and get going with lab space as well as greenhouse space, which is actually, it's hard to find in RTP. In North Carolina, it's hard to find greenhouse space if you're a startup and you're trying to do something. A lot of times you end up partnering with universities and using their greenhouses because it's what's available. So there's that. There's also for companies, we have a lot of big ag companies here. We have Bayer, we have Syngenta, and we have BASF. We have several like mid-tier companies as well. I think you can find a lot of resources for ag in general at the North Carolina Biotechnology Center. They have a directory page, and they also have a jobs board. Now, as for skills, okay, if you work with data, there's jobs in ag. If you are a IT networking person, there's jobs in ag. If you are, I guess any type of machine learning, same thing, jobs in ag. Software, definitely on the research side, there's always a need for like, .NET, Java, traditional things like that. They're always building out you know, laboratory information systems and all of these companies. So tons of opportunity. Yeah.
There's no way I'm going to answer that better than what you just did, but what I would say is that RTP has become an incubator specifically for AgTech, and there are a lot of initiatives like the one you're mentioning. I won't remember the name, but we got a letter recently about I think it's the RTP, like Economic Development Group, is working in partnership with NC State. They're applying for another grant that's going to be specifically around this idea of being an AgTech incubator. If you're not familiar with North Carolina State University, the College of Ag and Life Sciences has a big initiative around the Plant Sciences Initiative, which they're actually building a building on Centennial campus to not only house university research, but to allow startups and other industries to actually have space on the university where they're working in partnership with researchers there on campus. So I think we're in a lot of ways we're privileged to be located where we are because of the opportunity specific to AgTech. And like you were saying, if you're in the realm of data, networking, network security, there are going to be opportunities in the ag space, particularly here in the region we're in.
Yeah, a distinction I might call out as well is whether you are, a dynamic that struck me is some companies tend to rely on outsourcing, so they might have, like the company I worked at, just about all of the major technology projects were done through consultancies and engagements. And the in-source, if you will, the staff that was on the staff there, they would have small pockets that would touch on the rules you guys were discussing, but it would not be like you wouldn't have like a huge technical team. So to me, one opportunity would be potentially exploring being on the staff of one of these large companies, but as well the consultancies around them in this ecosystem who are hired to do these really fascinating engagements that are often extremely lucrative, which I've seen. Lots of money changing hands to solve problems for these large agricultural companies, and very interesting technologies in play, as we were discussing. Like everything we've talked about is in scope for that. And lots of pain to solve. Like these companies are throwing a lot of money at it, but like the question about data, they don't know what to do. The question about like execution, we know we're here, we want to go over there, we vaguely have an idea how to do it, we're just going to throw money at the problem and see where we end up. There's a lot of that going on. So to the extent that either you can find an opportunity inside, find a consultancy to work with to serve those needs, or even like the kind of startup vibe around here, like just engage with these companies, you will see every day, like, wow, that's a business opportunity.
Yeah.
I could spin off something and solve this for a variety of companies, and they would all need to buy it.
Okay, yes.
I recently went to an event where there was an ethical hacker. The ethical hacker said that people get very excited about their financial background. Agriculture is really the one you should be more scared about. And he used as an example, he went in and hacked a dairy and literally showed where he could have changed the dials live and turned the milk into pure acid. It would have gone down the line, nobody would have known it. And when I started thinking about the food, the supply chain that we're all involved in, even with what you're describing, you've got a machine that's out there spraying fertilizer on this one and spraying Roundup on this one. It's fairly easy to change that, just destroy a whole field. So if you would, give me a little insight, thoughts around just the security side of it, and really the risks that are associated with things that we digest every single day, to include animals.
Well,
Yummy bacon.
Don't, what do you say?
Yummy bacon.
Yummy bacon, yes.
Don't kill my bacon.
well, one thing that I'll point out before I pass this along is there's a huge opportunity there. Like if you're interested in starting a company in data security for agriculture, there's a huge opportunity.
That's a tough question. I mean, it is something it kind of goes back to the whole technology piece in general. With technology, there's always the opportunity for it in the hands of the wrong person to do something maliciously. I mean, there's been conversations around all the self-driving cars. Well, what if someone can hack that car and cause your car to run off the road or whatever? So I don't have the solution. I think if someone comes up with a solution, they're going to have a really good business opportunity. But I think it's just something that we have to be mindful of. But then also, I'm trying to think of the way to say this. But there's a certain level of to get the benefits of technology, we have to assume the risk of technology as well. And I don't know how you define the happy medium that's in there of saying, well, I want an automated dairy, so I know every time that cow walks through, then I know exactly how much milk they produce. But at the same time, it could come into the hands of the wrong person. There is that trade-off. So, and the answer to it, I don't have it. I wish I did. But I think part of it is just being conscious of it and ever mindful of it, so that we're trying to find the problems ahead of time versus learning from being reactive. There is a tendency in the realm that we live in to just try to be the first to market, not necessarily the best to market, and that can come at a cost.
I mean, I think you raised a great point, the security vulnerabilities, but to me, it's not unique to agriculture and a lot of solutions that are being spun up now. I could probably, if I went to LinkedIn, I could name 3 to 5 companies just in this area who do security around endpoints. So to me, it's the same idea. You have a bunch of sensors, a bunch of pieces of equipment that have APIs that can be called, and you, ideally, I'm making this up, but I assume you could take, to some extent, some off-the-shelf security solution and apply them to those. But you're not going to, it's obviously still going to be vulnerable. And there's probably not an impetus to do that ahead of the other innovation right now until someone hacks a sprayer, like they've hacked Teslas and stuff.
Yeah.
Tesla.
Tesla, car, sorry.
You touched on traceability, with being able, like, from farm to shelf. With all basically produce coming from outside of the country, is there a push to have like standardization? Because, like, for instance, right now I won't touch anything that says product of Mexico because of their notorious lack of cleanliness and stuff. So
You don't eat avocados?
No avocados.
No.
No guac.
I cry for you.
But like for their lettuce and strawberries and what have you, if I don't touch it. But I'd say with things coming from different countries from all around the world into the U.S., is there a push to have standard like traceability, and so that you can have alleviate fears like that?
So there are a lot, there are definitely companies that are looking at blockchain traceability solutions for some of that, for at least traceability and having a transparent chain has to be at least. As far as, what comes in the U.S., I mean, that's just, has to meet USDA standards and APHIS. But, that's all I can speak to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert at this, but I know there are certain standardizations. It really depends on the country and whether or not they, buy into it. But like, there's GAP certification, and I don't remember exactly what it stands. I know the G's global, but I can't remember and it's. So as you can imagine, the European market, for example, is much more restrictive in terms of the practices that they'll allow. So U.S. farmers that want to export to Europe, for example, a lot of times will be GAP certified, because it essentially is a way of being able to put a label on your food, your product, that says we adhere to this certain level of standards, one of them being traceability. And it also, I think you're open to like random security audits and things where people come in to make sure that what you're documenting is truly what is happening. But I don't know that there's really a way you can enforce that adoption, other than, in this case, the markets are driving it. If you want to sell to the European market, you have to be part of this sort of coalition, if you will, and adhere to these standards. I'm not sure how we're going to solve the Mexico piece, but.
Yeah, apparently you have to meet your, requirements that are set by the USDA.
Right.
Things get through, so. Okay, we can take one more question. Come on, you guys, we only have one more question.
Who asked
Okay.
the best question?
Yes. Oh, who had the best question?
We'll take 2 more questions.
All right, well, with that, I will go ahead and shut this down. So first, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you very much for everybody for coming. Please give this panel a hand. I think it's